Even after the 48% drop, I won't be buying Ubisoft stock. Financial analysts downgrade Ubisoft stock, citing Star Wars Outlaws and predicting it will underperform expectations. Ubisoft shares plunge again after investor urges company to go private. It's no longer just small YouTubers pointing out the embarrassing downfall of Ubisoft, which is underway as we speak. It's literally the entire world. Investment banks, journalists, game journos, and individual investors are all pointing out how the company is a sinking ship, yet it seems like Ubisoft themselves still aren't getting the memo. Ubisoft almost exclusively puts out stinkers these days, but 2024 has been an exceptional year even for them. Like almost no one, including some of Ubisoft's biggest critics, predicted they were going to flop multiple times in a row with this magnitude. Of course, we had XDefiant earlier this year, a game which, within a week of its wider release, everyone completely forgot about. Player numbers are collapsing, and on Twitch, the game has 788 viewers as I speak, which, for a new game which was meant to become an eSport, is shockingly low. Additionally, this embarrassing viewership count is almost exclusively propped up by a handful of streamers who have partner drops on, meaning that most of the interest in viewership is basically needing to be bribed in order to get them to watch. Now, of course, since it's a Ubisoft title, we aren't seeing fully transparent player stats, but Insider Gaming put out an article about XDefiant recently saying this. Internally, optimism for the game has shifted primarily due to the game's continuously declining player numbers and lack of player spending. One source told me that the game has been struggling to obtain 20,000 concurrent players across all of its platforms, whereas another said they, referring to Ubisoft, would probably be happy with that number, suggesting that it's now much lower. The declining numbers have created tension and anxiety within the team, with sources who spoke to me believing that more layoffs are only a matter of time. If that's true, I almost feel bad for the people who worked on the game. I mean, imagine spending years slogging away on a title, and then it looks like it's going to be a huge success. Millions of sign-ups and players on day one, only for them all to disappear just as quickly as they joined. And it's not like Ubisoft are exactly in a healthy position as a company as a whole. Their market cap now sits at around $1.5 billion, which, although relatively large, does still put them at a fraction of the value of most other supposed AAA studios like Activision, EA, Bethesda. Obviously, Bethesda was private, but they sold to Microsoft for about $7.5 billion. So in the whole scheme of things, Ubisoft is not a very valuable company. Seriously, I mean, take EA as an example as well. Since they're another public company with similar levels of hatred and bad PR, their market cap sits comfortably at $38.75 billion, and they're actually breaking into a new all-time high. I genuinely think much of Ubisoft's decision-making for the last 5 years was basically reskinning Assassin's Creed for the millionth time and just not being EA. But that's just not enough in today's day and age, especially since I would say among most of my friends who play games, now actually we hate Ubisoft more than EA, which is impressive given what EA did to Battlefield. I think it's also becoming increasingly clear that the only reason Ubisoft is managing to barely stay afloat is off the back of Assassin's Creed, a franchise which they've been running dry since Black Flag. It's an amazing concept for a game, don't get me wrong, and the first few were pretty great. But for most players, Assassin's Creed has become tired, and they're running out of ideas for how they can change things up. Well, Assassin's Creed and I guess also Far Cry, but again, that is a once great franchise which is now pretty much finished. There's also another issue becoming increasingly apparent with the company, which is their culture. What I'm about to say is becoming a term increasingly used by people I'd rather not associate with, but go woke, go broke is very much a real phenomenon, with Ubisoft being a pretty good example. The company's stock price has been in free fall for years at this point, yet they still seemingly can't work out why they're hemorrhaging money. I mean, here's an idea for you guys. Maybe it's having a company culture which thinks that pulling stuff like this, whilst your company is plummeting in value and no one is playing your games, and you think that this is a good idea, could be part of the problem. But although this internship program is yet another bad piece of PR from the company, which at one point made some actually decent games, it's far from being the sole reason that Ubisoft is headed towards bankruptcy at this rate. What it does do, though, is highlight the fact that they have entered the business of politics at a time where focusing on making actually good games should be more important than ever. What a lot of YouTubers I've seen cover this topic don't mention, though, is that in 2024, making decisions like this could actually be, in a roundabout sort of way, a profitable business decision. Sure, as consumers, we might be left scratching our heads or rolling our eyes when they pull something like this, but if Ubisoft managed to pivot into being known as like the most diverse, inclusive, trans-friendly game publisher, then a certain group of investors will likely throw them a bone irrespective of the company's financial success. In essence, there are two main ways to extract a large amount of money out of a company. Firstly, you can, actually run a successful company, generating revenue from good products and or services. But the other way, instead of selling products, is to sell a dream to investors. This basically makes the company the product instead, and what you're selling is actually just the dream. We see this all the time in the US especially, where a pre-product experimental AI startup will have no product, no customers, and like 3 employees who have just graduated from university, but they'll receive a $50 million investment round just off the back of angel investors liking what they might be doing or what they stand for, but probably will fail at. Ubisoft, despite not having the appeal of a startup, could be trying to pull one of these, instead becoming a DEI / I really don't like using this word, but it's kind of hard to avoid it in this context, woke / progressive company that people invest in solely for political reasons, irrespective of whether they actually make anything good or not. If you don't believe me or don't believe that investors will often throw money at companies regardless of their financials, especially in the media / tech space, then just take a look at something like Vice or BuzzFeed as an example. I mean, they're both terrible companies on paper which make no financial sense to invest in. They're just pouring money down the drain. But people still did invest, making their founders incredibly wealthy, even if the companies never actually made that much money from operating. But yeah, Ubisoft is looking like they're going to have to fire more people, downsize their offices, cut back on their release schedule, all of the above, because even when they do manage to hype a game up and draw in millions of players, they quickly blow it after everyone remembers that it's a Ubisoft game. This is another big part, I think, of why Ubisoft is having problems. At one point, they did actually reach a sort of degree of saturation where pretty much anyone who had a console or PC has played at least a couple of Ubisoft games. And a lot of the time, with their more recent releases, it doesn't really leave a very good impression in people's minds. Even if a game looks brilliant, I mean, some of the Assassin's Creed trailers, they look amazing. You think the game is going to be absolutely brilliant, and then you remember, oh, it's Ubisoft that made it. It's probably going to be a crock of shit. And I think they really are fighting an uphill battle every time that they release a game. Even if it might be slightly good, people remember that Ubisoft is who is behind it, and it definitely does ward off a lot of people. I think they either need to completely rebrand, maybe. I think that could be a good PR move. Just change the name, That might actually be a pretty good idea. Or the other thing would be, I mean, they're just going to need like completely new franchises, maybe even like a new game engine. I think genuinely people dislike Ubisoft even down to the point where people dislike just the look of Ubisoft games. Not even how they play necessarily, but Ubisoft games do tend to have this sort of like, I can't even explain it. They have a certain feel, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to the game engine that they work in, which is, I think it's proprietary a lot of the time. I don't think they really use, Unreal or a lot of the other kind of wider industry used engines. And as a result, they have a certain way of making assets, and the lighting looks a certain way, and everything looks a certain way. And I'm not saying it necessarily looks bad, but it looks like a Ubisoft game. And I think people don't really like the feel of a Ubisoft game. So Ubisoft sort of needs to no longer be Ubisoft at this point, in my opinion. Perhaps something that they could look into is just not making Ubisoft games. I know it sounds counterintuitive because that's the thing that made them a multi-billion-dollar company. But at this point, their PR is so bad, and people have been stung so many times by playing Ubisoft games that they definitely have a increasingly limited number of players who still trust and like their games. And they need to do something radical to change that. And I don't personally believe that the radical thing they should be doing is changing their company policy in a way which a lot of gamers aren't really a big fan of.